Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out to Santa Clara. This is my home turf, so I'm delighted to see you here. And today I'm going to talk about a project that I'm working on. It's fairly early stage, and so I'm looking forward to your reactions and comments and questions so that I can continue to iterate it. The project is called Net Benefit: How the Internet Improves Humanity. And it actually is as bold as it sounds. And I'm going to make my case to you about why I think we can support this and what its policy implications are. Let me just start with doing a quick mind check, where people's heads are at. If I were to ask you to describe the internet in one meme or GIF, shout out where your head might be at. What are you thinking about? Wait, did someone say dumpster fire? Now, I need to point out that this is not a plant, but it is someone who knows me very well because she suffered through one of my classes. The dumpster fire. So look, this is pretty basic, right? This is what we think about when we think about the internet. We instantly go negative. We instantly think about all the problems. I believe some of the speakers that are coming after me are going to continue to add fuel to this dumpster fire. I'm coming from a completely different place. Sorry, I'm going to skip this slide. I'm going to give you a thesis about my project, and then I'm going to give you some supporting evidence. So my goal is to explain how, compared to the offline baseline, user-generated content can improve the human species. Now, obviously, I'm going for some big stuff here. I'm talking about us as humans, as 8 billion people all sharing the same planet. I'm putting on the table that I think we can be better. And I'm suggesting that there's a mechanism that's going to help us get better, and that's user-generated content. That's us talking to each other. Now, in my title, I use the term internet. Now, it actually would be easier for me if I tried to show that the internet makes us better. That would pick up a bunch of things like all these self-improvement apps that you can download that actually make you better. But I'm actually not trying to reach those. I'm trying to reach the idea that the way we talk to each other, what we're saying to each other, can actually make us better as a species. But I have a huge qualifier, and that's this notion of compared to the offline baseline. So I'm not trying to say that we are going to be good. I'm simply going to say, let me take a snapshot of what humanity is like in the offline world, and then I'm going to say, can we do better than that using the mechanisms of our conversations on the internet? It's this last piece that I think often gets forgotten, this compared to the offline baseline. We look at all the antisocial things we do to each other online, and we assume that is the default state of nature. Just we're terrible to each other online. But we're also terrible to each other offline too. And that's the part that gets forgotten. It's not like we started out pristine, doing great stuff, and then the internet corrupted us. We started out flawed, and we are still today. Let me try and model this out for you. I'm going to give you a stylized model. This is how economists do it. This is like a gross oversimplification. You want to tear this apart, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you. But just work with me for a moment and model a construct. Let's take for a moment this notion that there's this offline baseline of bad behavior in society, okay? So I could reverse this. I could say there's good behavior, and I could reverse the model about how the internet will actually turbocharge or raise the good behavior. But let's just focus on the bad behavior piece of it. Let's talk about the offline baseline. So I'm just saying, like, there's a snapshot of offline baseline. Of course, this is an artificial construct, right? Sometimes we're better to each other than worse. Sometimes we're, in some communities are good and other communities are bad. I'm just going to pick a flat line and say, let's just pick a number and say that's what the offline baseline is. So the typical analysis of the internet and of user-generated content has been that we exceed that offline baseline online. That the internet takes whatever is awful about us and it turbocharges us. That's what the little clip art is here. That it's taken us further than we would normally go because of the affordances of the internet. What I often have heard as maybe the libertarian counter-response is the argument that the internet doesn't make us worse, it just shows us how terrible we are. It's a mirror that shows us or illustrates us to us what we otherwise would choose to ignore. And so that's where the monkey is taking a look at itself, and it's shocked it's a monkey. It didn't realize it was a monkey only until it saw itself in the mirror. And so we might say that the internet is just that mirror. We're seeing things that we could have otherwise ignored in physical space. We're seeing them when we're shocked by what we see, but they're not new. They're just things we never paid attention to before. Now here's my argument, here's my goal, is to show you actually that the internet can make us below the offline baseline. And that's where I got the slow down thing. It slows down our worst tendencies. It actually gives us the opportunity to do better than we could have offline. So let me talk about how that could happen. So I just have this clip art of two people talking to each other in physical space. And there's a bunch of things that are presumed or inferred from this particular depiction that are not expressly depicted in the photo. We just assume them. The first, obviously, is that they are able to get together in physical space. Let's start with that. That's something that we can't take for granted anymore. But we assume that there's a bunch of cultural norms and social conventions that are governing that conversation. They're not depicted in the photo. We just know they're there. We also know that there's a set of reputational mechanisms sitting on this photo, that if one of the players in this conversation engages in bad behavior in this conversation, the other person will think less of them. And so there's some mechanisms that regulate this conversation, not the law. They're just built into the way that we talk to each other. Now, the internet allows us to do the same kind of thing. We're having these conversations, but there's a wire in the middle, this thing called a wire. Now, I know that some of you are millennials, maybe even we have some Gen Z in the room. You're like, what the heck is that even depicting? This is what we used to call a like homebrew, do-it-yourself telephone system. You take a wire and you put two receivers at the end and you could talk over some distance to each other without actually using the telephone system. I don't know if people still do this anymore, but as a model, it reflects that because there's that wire in the middle, there's now some new technological capabilities and limitations that are added. And that's exactly what I'm interested in. What is the internet, as this mediator of this conversation, going from the upper left and going to the bottom right by adding that wire in the middle? What are the things that it allows it to do? And I'm going to give you, I'm skipping my Star Trek example. That just kills me to do that in this audience. But in the interest of time, I'm going to give you just an example of how this works. So remember, there's this wire in the middle that didn't exist in the offline model that I showed you, the two people talking to each other. And that wire in the middle can do things like what are sometimes called civility prompts. So the idea here is that it's watching the conversations taking place, and it's like a good little angel sitting on your shoulder. And it says, I see that you're about to say something that might be considered antisocial. Are you sure you want to say that? Now, I don't have that in the offline world. Boy, I really need it. There are plenty of times that that good little angel could save me from putting my foot in my mouth. But online, you can have the wire monitoring that conversation and intervening in a way that can encourage people to move towards more pro-social behavior than they might have achieved without that intervention, and perhaps than they might have achieved in the offline world. So, for example, Nextdoor, the local social media, uses technology like this to monitor posts that are about to be made and to suggest to some of those people, what you're saying might be considered racist. Are you sure you want to say that? Or what you're saying might be considered antisocial. Are you sure you want to say that? And they found that they could basically reduce by a third the total incidence of racist or antisocial behavior just by having the little angel on your shoulder pop up and ask you to engage in nicer behavior. Now, Twitter, now this was pre-Musk. I think we always have to say, are we talking pre or post-Musk Twitter, right? This is pre-Musk Twitter. What pre-Musk Twitter found was that not only could they get the same kind of results by intervening with these civility prompts, but that they persisted over a period of extra days. That not only the person make a better choice at the time, but they made better choices in the next several days thereafter. And so that little good angel sitting on your virtual shoulder online was actually encouraging people to do better than they would have chosen to do just by virtue of the intervention. Now, some of you are saying, this doesn't actually sound new. And so some of you may remember, for example, that Eudora, right? This is a crowd that might remember Eudora. Eudora actually did this over 20 years ago. They were trying to do the exact same thing with civility prompts. And that's part of my project, is to say we've been trying these things for years. What can we learn from them? Let's put them together in a single place to say, these are ways in which the technology can make us do better. So my goal is to collect up examples like these civility prompts, put them into a book that says, here's a series of case studies of empirical data that's been developed over the course of the past 25 plus years that show us how we can move towards a better forms of interaction. I don't know if you remember with Eudora, they actually did it with the 3 chili pepper approach. The first chili pepper is like, hey, careful. Second chili pepper is like, hey, this is getting a little spicy here. And third chili pepper is like, do you really, really, really want to do that? Of course, that when it was a chili pepper type thing, some people were like, how can I get the 4th chili pepper? How can I go over the limit? So you have to watch out how it's designed. And again, skip over the slide in the interest of time. So I'm giving you just an anecdote, just one little example of how the intervention could help improve the human condition. But let me talk about some of the policy implications of this. From a regulatory standpoint, what does this tell us or teach us? So the first thing is that it's unrealistic to expect services to fix long-standing human problems. And that's basically where the regulators are going today. They're saying, I don't care that people are antisocial offline. I expect you to eliminate antisocial behavior online. And that's just not realistic. Not only can we not squeeze out the antisocial tendencies in the human species, but we certainly can't do it immediately, and certainly internet companies don't have the ability to do that. So the whole construct of expecting zero tolerance type approaches to the internet doesn't work. And if you look at what's going on in places like Europe, there's proposals that are called things like online safety bills. They're basically saying, you don't have to eliminate antisocial behavior, but if you don't, we're going to penalize you. So basically saying, don't allow antisocial behavior online, that's simply not possible. And when we demand more from the internet services than they're capable of delivering, it actually becomes a wedge in the relationship. Internet services like, if you ask me to do that and I simply cannot, I have to do something different. Either I control my environment in such a way that prevents people from talking to each other. More likely I say, this is a game I can't win, just like with Whopper, the only way to win is not to play whatsoever. So we're actually seeing this concern about asking services to do better than the offline baseline, to eliminate the antisocial behavior that's in the offline world, is basically a way of saying, don't do what you're doing at all, don't allow these conversations to take place. Now, what's going to happen in response to this is actually quite horrifying, but we're already seeing it. We're going to see a broad-scale shift in the internet away from user-generated content, us talking to each other, to the broadcasting model where a small number of professional producers are broadcasting content at us. It's basically the model of the internet that we feared we were going to see back in the mid-1990s, that we were going to replicate the model of the cable companies, the 1,000 channels that we all had to pay for in our bundled fee when we paid our cable companies. We didn't have a choice whether or not to pay for them. We were giving money to these services, and then they were doling it out to all these professional producers who, with 1,000 channels, you had a lot of choices. You just didn't have the choices that you have today. And who loses in that model? There's 2 main losers: the people who don't get access to broadcast their content, and who are the people who are going to get access and who aren't? That's going to reify the existing power structure. Who's going to get access? The people who have power. The people who don't have power, they don't get access to broadcast. What also is going to happen is, as we launch these paywalls to shut off content from people, we basically create a model of haves and have-nots. We deepen the digital divide even further to say, either you can afford to pay to get access to content or you can't. We haven't worried so much about that in the user-generated content model because we've been seeing the production of so much freely accessible content. And that model is under extraordinary pressure because of the regulatory mechanisms that are driving people away from user-generated content. One of the other comments I get is that people say, well, look, this is just the boomers. They don't know what they're doing. And so, they're coming in, they're just imposing these ridiculous obligations in ways that are not, that can't be complied with. And honestly, I don't believe the boomers are the biggest problem. I think the biggest problem are the millennials and especially Gen Z. Gen Z grew up with all of the antisocial experiences all being meted online. They don't even think about the fact that people are all for online because they didn't spend nearly as much time offline as all of the older generations did. So essentially they equate bad behavior with bad behavior on the internet. They're the same thing for the digital natives. And that poses extreme problems for the future. If the future is, we think that the technologically literate are gonna save us, they don't know how rare the situations that we have. They don't know what the alternative looks like. They don't remember models of information scarcity. And they're more willing to say, I'm gonna penalize the internet because of the fact that I suffered all these experiences growing up. So I think the model isn't going to get better, it's actually going to get worse over time. Okay, so what are we going to do about this? Just some ideas of things we might do differently. This is the most obvious one, evidence-based policymaking. We shouldn't be making policies based on these presumptions. I wish that you'd wave the magic wand and get rid of all antisocial content on the internet. That's just not possible. So what we should be doing is general kinds of things like you establish an offline barrier sign for comparison, and you say, okay, let's see if we can work with the services to achieve that offline baseline, to not turbocharge it, but to at least do no worse than mirroring it. But we have to be honest about the fact that there is this offline baseline. Regulators aren't doing that. We should be using standard methodologies like cost-benefit analysis. What does the intervention cost us? What does the intervention benefit for us? That's not happening at all. And in fact, one of the main reasons it's not happening is because we've lost the discussion or the narrative about the pro-social benefits of the internet. So because we're not getting that, we're not hearing the cost of changing the internet. The regulators are like, all I hear is complaints. I'm not hearing anyone tell me why they actually care about this. So it's like an easy call. Fix the complaints, you don't have to worry about the opportunity costs. One of the main goals of my book is to tell all these opportunity costs, to put them in an elegant fashion. It says, here's the ways that we could be better, and the regulation that you're proposing actually is going to prevent us from being able to do that. We should expand the adoption of pro-social techniques. We should understand what works, and then we should try to propagate it. Now, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution here. What works in Internet Service A isn't guaranteed to work in Internet Service B. So we can't mandate that they're all across, but we can say, let's learn from what we've experienced here. Is there things that would be replicatable elsewhere? And the government can do this by doing things like funding research. The government has a role to play in using its power of the purse to produce more of the information that will help people understand that. They can also do things to help diffuse that knowledge, to share it so that people are learning from each other. The government is not thinking in those terms. They're thinking in terms of how do we crack down and force people to do less, as opposed to how do we actually propagate the best ideas? How can we use our power to do that? And this may sound obvious, but one of my calls of action to you is you should be telling whoever your elected politicians are to be fighting for the internet, not fighting against the internet. And I guarantee you, every single person in this room, you have voted for people who are working against the internet. How am I so confident? Because everyone is. There's no politicians fighting for the internet anymore. So all of them, with your tax dollars, with the support of your vote, are actually working against the future of the internet. They don't care because they're not hearing enough pushback from people like you. And that may sound weird, like, well, I'm just one person. I don't have anything to say. Absolutely you do. They work for you. I know that sounds weird, but that's how they think. And if you tell them that they're not doing the job you want, they will listen. And so my final recommendation is we do need to actually impose some detriments to people who are working against the internet. And we can't just keep rubber stamping the same folks and expecting that they're going to change their behavior. So long as there's political payoffs to politicians to be working against the internet, they're going to keep doing it. And so we need to not only tell them what we want, but we need to actually hold them accountable when they don't. This is not happening today. And some of the reason why is because of talks like the ones that you're hearing at the rest of this conference. Here are all the problems with the internet. As long as that's all we're talking about, we're going to miss the fact that this political calculus feeds into changing something that I think is worth fighting for. I actually think I came in under my 20 minutes, not sure, but it was my goal because I know you're going to have some comments and questions, and why don't we see what's on your mind?